They thought she was nobody. They were wrong. A fluorescent buzz filled Hangar 3 at Ramstein Air Base, the kind that rattled in your molars if you stood beneath the lamps too long. Tool carts clattered, hydraulics hissed, and the damp spring air carried a whiff of JP8 you could taste at the back of your throat. Into that racket walked Lieutenant Claire Morgan, clipboard tucked to her chest, sleeves rolled past the elbows. Lightning-shaped scar-silver ridges that caught every glare zigzagged from wrist to biceps on both arms. Most people tried not to stare. The newest private on the flight line made staring his hobby. Private Tyler T.B. Brooks lounged against the nose wheel of an F-35 like it was a bar stool, uniform still crisp from tech school graduation 3 weeks earlier. 3 equally fresh buddies orbited him, laughing at every joke he fired off, but the laughter always spiked when the lieutenant stepped within earshot. "Careful, Lieutenant," Brooks called as she passed. "Paperwork can be lethal. Looks like it already drew blood." His friends snorted. A wrench somewhere stopped mid-turn. The senior crew chiefs didn't yell. They just went suddenly quiet, which should have been warning enough. Claire Morgan measured Brooks with a glance eyes grey. Bottomless then turned the same calm stare on the jet's intake panel. She said nothing, just made a note on her manifest, and kept walking. The silence felt like somebody had killed the power. Brooks shoved off the wheel. "Come on, nobody else curious how she earned those lightning bolts? I bet she tripped over a toolbox." He mimed a pratfall. His buddies cracked up. A middle-aged tech sergeant across the bay shook his head but kept splicing fiber-optic line, refusing to take the bait. Brooks's laughter followed the lieutenant all the way to supply, where Master Sergeant Dan Rivers handed her a crate of replacement pumps. "Everything squared away, ma'am," Rivers said, voice gentle in a body built like a linebacker. She thanked him, hefted the 50-pound crate solo, and headed toward the drone maintenance bay. Brooks watched her go, smirk sharpening. "Bet she can't install those without stripping half the screws." "Leave it, Brooks," Rivers warned. "Low enough, only the fools could miss the danger." Brooks didn't leave it. He jogged after her, forcing the others to trail like ducklings. "Lieutenant, ma'am," he said, hanging the honorifics with mock respect, "how about we make this interesting? You get that pump seated and pressurized by 1400, I'll polish every wing surface in this hangar. But if you can't, if you drop so much as one washer, you run 3 laps around the flight line in front of the whole squadron." Morgan set the crate on a rolling stand. "Is that an official wager, Private?" Her voice was soft, steady. Brooks heard softness as weakness. "Sure is, ma'am, unless you're afraid of a little sprinting." Across the aisle, Staff Sergeant Leah Patel froze with a torque wrench in hand. "Lieutenant," she said carefully, "you don't have to prove anything." Morgan offered Patel a tiny smile. "3 laps? You're on, Private?" She tore the Velcro name patch from her chest and slapped it on Brooks's sleeve. "Hold that for me. I'll collect it later." The audacity stunned him long enough for her to wheel the stand under a half-assembled MQ-25. The prop blades were stowed, the belly gaped open. She slid inside the access cavity like it was a familiar cave, feet dangling in the air. A hush spread. Even the compressor tests outside seemed to quiet, as though the whole base leaned in to watch. Brooks made a show of checking his watch. "Better hustle, Lieutenant. Clock's ticking." Morgan's reply echoed from inside the fuselage. "Time's never what you think it is, Private." A cryptic statement, swallowed by the drone's carbon fiber ribs. Patel exhaled, muttering to a nearby corporal, "That kid just challenged a ghost and doesn't know it." "Ghost?" the corporal whispered. "Long story," Patel said, eyes never leaving the dangling boots. Minutes crawled. Ratchets clicked in an impossibly methodical rhythm, no hesitation, no backtracking. Brooks paced, conjuring fresh barbs but finding fewer laughs now that the bay watched in silence. 10 minutes before the deadline, Morgan slid out, lowered the panel, and snapped the locking latches with one practice swing. She wiped her palms, turned a single valve, and the diagnostics console blinked green across the bay. "Pressure stable, 100%, Patel announced, eyebrows lifting clear off her face. Brooks forced a grin. "Lucky break, Lieutenant, but anybody can rush and install. Let's see if it holds through startup." Morgan nodded once. "Go ahead." The ground crew chief keyed ignition on the remote station. Turbine blades spooled. The drone's systems hummed awake. Numbers rolled into the green. Pressure held. Temperature held. Brooks's grin sagged. Morgan extended her hand. "My name tape, Private." He peeled it from his sleeve, fingers suddenly clumsy, and placed it in her scarred palm. Heat climbed his cheeks. Around them, the hush deepened into something denser: respect from the veterans, calculation from the rookies, dread from Brooks himself. She returned the patch to her chest. Wing surfaces await your polish. One of Brooks's friends attempted a joke, but the punchline died when Master Sergeant Rivers appeared, buffer pad in hand. Start with the Lightning II over there, Rivers said. Every square inch. Brooks swallowed. Yes, Sergeant. Morgan watched the exchange without triumph or gloatingly, that calm, unsettling stillness. Then she picked up her clipboard, noted the completed task, and walked toward hangar control. As she passed Brooks, she said, voice barely above the hum, "Bravado's cheap, Private. Make sure you spend it wisely." He pretended not to hear, but the words rooted somewhere behind his ribs. By the time she disappeared through the double doors, the weight of those roots had begun to pull his swagger apart. Outside, clouds gathered over the Palatinate forest, thunder rolling low. Inside, the thunder was quieter, crouching in scar tissue and unanswered questions. Nobody yet knew just how loud it would get. She didn't defend herself. She didn't need to. The next morning, Private Brooks was on the tarmac at 0600, bucket in hand, polishing the wing of an F-22 until his reflection stared back at him with red-rimmed eyes. His friends had stopped teasing by lap 2. Now, most just gave him a wide berth, unsure whether to pity or avoid him. Lieutenant Claire Morgan walked by twice, never looked at him. Inside the command center, a hush fell over the room when she entered to log routine maintenance data. Officers glanced up from their terminals, their eyes lingering just a bit longer. Some stiffened in their seats. Others simply nodded not, the formal nod reserved for lieutenants, but a measured, cautious acknowledgement, the kind you gave someone who could make or break entire missions. Colonel Abrams, the base's operations commander, passed her in the hallway. "Good morning, Lieutenant," he said, tone neutral. "Sir," she replied, nodding once. No hesitation, no salutes, just familiarity. Like they'd been in some place before where rank didn't matter, only survival did. Brooks caught the exchange from a corner near logistics. "Why's a full-bird colonel speaking to her like that?" he muttered. No one answered. Later that afternoon, Brooks was assigned to shadow her during an avionics systems check. He kept quiet, watching as she diagnosed a navigation fault on a Falcon drone without ever consulting the manual. She ran her hand along the edge of the access panel, paused, and tapped a single relay buried 3 inches deep. "Cross. Linked," she murmured, half to herself. A senior tech leaned over to check. "She's right. One of the guidance relays is drawing interference from the backup navlink. Who even sees that on a first pass?" Claire didn't acknowledge the compliment. She simply updated the log and moved on to the next drone. Brooks followed like a shadow, no longer smirking. "You memorize every schematic on base?" he asked, trying for casual. "Only the ones worth fixing," she replied without looking up. He hesitated, then said more quietly, "Where'd you learn to spot a fault like that just by listening to the system spin up?" Claire paused, adjusted a torque wrench, and responded evenly, "Some things you only learn after doing them under fire, and hoping you don't have to do them twice." Brooks blinked. "Like, literal fire?" She glanced at him. For a heartbeat, something flickered in her gaze like a door cracking open, then slamming shut again. "Let's focus on diagnostics, Private," she said, ending the conversation. Still, the question simmered in Brooks's mind. There was a discipline to her motion too practiced, too fast. She never wasted a step, a movement, a breath. When a fuel line hissed unexpectedly during a pressure test, Claire dropped into a crouch instinctively, sweeping her arm out in front of Brooks to stop him without even thinking. She stood again like nothing happened, but Brooks noticed her hands. Steady, always steady. That evening, Sergeant Patel cornered him in the break room. "You're starting to look like you've seen a ghost," she said, half smiling. "Why does everyone keep saying that?" Brooks asked. "What's with the ghost thing?" Patel didn't answer at first. She just sipped her coffee, watching him. "You ever heard of Operation Longstar?" she finally asked. Brooks shook his head. "Exactly," she said. "You're not supposed to." "What's that got to do with?" She leaned in. "There's stuff you learn in briefings, Brooks, and then there's stuff you only whisper in basements after the lights are off. You're following someone who's done things you can't imagine and survived things you shouldn't." Brooks opened his mouth to speak, but the PA system cut in. "Attention. All maintenance personnel report to Bay 4 for VIP inspection readiness." Patel stood up. "Better move. Wouldn't want to disappoint the lieutenant. Brooks followed her out the door, his stomach twisting. The next day, the air felt heavier. A general rumored to be a 4-star was making an unscheduled inspection. Everyone scrubbed harder, cleaned faster. Officers triple-checked their uniforms. Junior enlisted stood straighter. Lieutenant Morgan, as usual, moved through it all like mist. She prepared systems, answered questions, and quietly coordinated a dozen checklists. Then she stood near the back of the command center, arms folded, eyes on nothing and everything. Brooks stood behind her, posture tight. He didn't speak. He didn't joke. Something about the way people orbited her now, it unsettled him. When the double doors slammed open and General Nathaniel Rhodes entered, the entire room locked upright like a sculpture garden. Rhodes walked the line with purpose, nodding at officers, exchanging quick words with Abrams. He made it halfway through the room before freezing eyes locked on Claire Morgan. And then, "Morgan?" he said quietly, as if he'd just seen someone return from the dead. "Number, not Morgan, Phantom?" The entire command center held its breath. Even the lights seemed to dim. Brooks's heart stopped. Did he say Phantom? That name wasn't just a rumor. That name belonged to a legend. And he'd challenged her to a wrench duel. That wasn't just any woman. That was the woman who designed the whole damn operation. The room was frozen in place. General Nathaniel Rodessa, man who had commanded elite joint forces across 3 continents, stood staring at a maintenance officer like he'd seen a ghost. Or maybe like he'd just found a lost part of himself. His voice dropped, no longer the barking tone of a 4-star general addressing subordinates, but a quiet reverence. "Phantom," he said again, a smile tugging at one corner of his mouth. "You still hiding in plain sight, huh?" Claire Morgan, for the first time since arriving at Ramstein, allowed the faintest trace of emotion to cross her face, something halfway between surprise and resignation. "General Rhodes," she replied with respectful calm. "Didn't expect to see you here." General Rhodes didn't return her salute. Instead, he saluted her a clean, crisp motion that made several officers inhale sharply. A general saluting a lieutenant? It was unthinkable. Breach of protocol. But nobody moved to correct him. And then, Rhodes turned to face the stunned room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying like thunder, "you've been working alongside one of the most decorated, most tactically brilliant operatives I've ever commanded." He pointed not at Abrams, not at any colonel, but straight at Claire Morgan. This woman, Colonel Claire Morgan, codename Phantom, saved 2 NATO delegations, redirected a hostile insurgency in real time from a single drone interface, and was the architect of Operation Daggerlight. If you don't know what that is, good, you're not cleared for it. A silence followed so heavy, it made Brooks feel like he couldn't breathe. His legs threatened to give out. He had mocked her. He had joked about her scars he now realized likely came from battlefields he couldn't even pronounce. Claire cleared her throat gently. "Sir, with respect, I prefer to continue serving under my current designation." Rhodes raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. "Still avoiding the spotlight?" "I wasn't made for the stage," she replied. "Just the mission." There was quiet admiration in his eyes. Very well, but the truth needed to be said. He turned to the room again. "Operational security remains in effect. Outside this room she is still Lieutenant Morgan. Inside, you treat her with the dignity her record has earned." No one said a word, but everyone nodded. When Rhodes turned to leave, he stopped just inches from Brooks. The private stood stiffly at attention, face pale, heart pounding. The general's stare cut through him like a scalpel. "Name?" "Private First Class, Tyler Brooks, sir." Rhodes glanced at Claire, and something passed between them, brief, unreadable, like a silent agreement. Then the general said simply, "Carry on, Private." Brooks couldn't even speak. He just nodded, rigid, his mouth too dry to form words. As the general left, Colonel Abrams moved quickly to accompany him. Claire Morgano, Colonel Morgan, remained still for a moment longer, then walked back to her terminal like nothing had happened. Her posture hadn't changed, but the atmosphere around her had shifted permanently. Officers approached her with quiet words, none of them loud. Sergeants who had once offered simple reports now addressed her with quiet reverence. Even the ones who'd never seen combat could feel it, the weight of what she'd done, and more importantly, the power she didn't flaunt. Brooks stood frozen in the corner, the sting of his ignorance still radiating in his chest. He had spent weeks mocking a ghost, now a legend with a name. As he turned away, Staff Sergeant Patel came up beside him. "Told you," she said without judgment. "You challenged a ghost." "I didn't know," Brooks muttered. "I thought she was just a quiet maintenance officer." "That was the point," Patel said. "You never know who someone is by how loud they are. The real ones don't need to announce it." That night, Brooks couldn't sleep. He replayed every comment, every joke, every arrogant smirk in his head. Every time he thought of her standing silently, accepting his ridicule without a word, he felt smaller. Not because she had punished him, but because she never had to. The next morning, the base returned to routine on the surface. But something in the air had changed. People still called her Lieutenant Morgan. She still wore the same uniform, walked the same halls. But the way people moved around her was different, now more alert, more careful, not out of fear, but out of recognition. Brooks showed up early. No jokes, no swagger, just quiet attention. He caught a glimpse of her in the maintenance bay, speaking softly to a young airman struggling with a calibration. She didn't correct him, she taught him, patiently, like someone who had nothing left to prove, and everything to pass on. Some heroes wear their medals, others just wear their scars. 2 days after the general's visit, the base felt almost normal again. Aircraft still landed like thunder, crew chiefs still barked across hangars. Pilots still cracked nervous jokes before climbing into machines that defied gravity, but under the surface, everyone walked with just a little more care, a little more respect. Brooks hadn't said much. He worked quietly, showed up early, and asked more questions now, but not the arrogant kind, the learning kind. The kind Claire Morgan seemed to respect. That afternoon, he was assigned to retrieve a maintenance log from Equipment Room C. He expected to be alone. Instead, he opened the door and found her sitting at a narrow desk, poring over a schematic in silence. "Ma'am, Colonel Lieutenant," he stammered, heart racing. She looked up, no surprise in her face. "Private Brooks," she said calmly. "Looking for something?" Yeah, the log binder for Bay 2's diagnostics." "Top shelf." She nodded toward a cabinet behind him. Brooks retrieved it, but lingered. His hands clenched the binder too tight. He took a breath. "Ma'am," he said, voice cracking, "I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For all of it. The jokes, the way I treated you. I had no idea." Claire regarded him quietly, her face unreadable. Then she spoke, low and even. "You weren't supposed to." He blinked. "I still shouldn't have." "You were disrespectful and careless," she said, not unkindly. "Yes, but you're also not the first, and you won't be the last." Brooks lowered his eyes. "I deserve worse than a lecture." Claire reached for her sleeves and calmly rolled them down, hiding the web of silver scars like she'd done it 1,000 times before. "Scars tell stories, Private. Not all of them are yours to read." He swallowed hard. She stood up and walked past him. At the doorway, she paused. "Everyone makes mistakes, Brooks. The measure of a soldier isn't in avoiding them. It's in how you respond once you realize you've made one." And then she was gone. That night, Brooks couldn't sleep again, but this time, not from shame, from understanding. For the first time, he saw past the rumors. Past the whispers of Phantom and Operation Daggerlight. He saw the woman who chose to serve quietly, who didn't need the spotlight, and who never demanded respect, but earned it without saying a word. Over the following weeks, Claire continued as before, overseeing repairs, guiding rookies, moving like a shadow through steel and noise. She never asked for more, never claimed the title of colonel. But people looked at her differently now. And Brooks changed too. The wisecracks disappeared. He asked to take extra maintenance shifts. He read manuals cover to cover. He offered help instead of attitude. And sometimes, when no one was watching, he stole glances at her, wondering who she had been and how she'd become who she was. He never asked again. He didn't need to. One evening, they ended up working late on opposite ends of the hangar. The air was quiet, the drone of overhead lights the only sound. Claire adjusted a calibration pin under a panel. Brooks, at his own bench, finally solved a persistent sensor misread. He let out a small, satisfied exhale. "Good work," she said from across the space. "That panel's been stubborn for weeks." "Thank you, ma'am," he replied, then added, cautiously, "May I ask you something?" Claire looked up. The crew chiefs sometimes talk about Black Star or Daggerlight, like it was something impossible. She studied him for a moment. then nodded slowly. Impossible things are only impossible until someone does them, she said. Then they become just difficult. Brooks smiled faintly. You don't like talking about it, do you? She offered a rare, honest half-smile. Talking never helped anyone survive a battlefield. He nodded. I used to think the best soldiers were the ones with medals and stories. And now? She asked. Now I think it's the ones who show up every day and do the hard work, even if nobody ever knows their name. She gave him one final look and nod, simple and solemn. You're learning. Private. The next morning, a new group of recruits arrived. One of them, a cocky kid in a pressed uniform, watched Claire walk past with her sleeves rolled up and her clipboard underarm. He snickered. Who's the paper pusher with the burn marks? He asked loudly. Brooks turned to him, quiet, firm. I'd be careful there, he said. You don't know who someone is until you've walked in their boots. The recruit scoffed. She's just a maintenance officer. Brooks smiled, remembering the general's salute, the scars, the silence, and the lessons. There's no such thing, he said, as just anything in this man's army. Claire Morgan disappeared down the hallway, her shadow long, her story unwritten. But for those who had seen behind the quiet, behind the scars, she would never be just anything again. And that was exactly how she wanted it.